Explore Ecstatic Sensuality, the hottest love and relationship podcast. I'm your host, Randolph Pitts, and this week, it really doesn't matter the things I do, as long as I can do them with you. Wait a minute, where are we? Okay, Alt-Tab. At the risk of being controversial, if a woman signals to a man that she is sexually available, a lot of the time he is going to consent without asking himself what she really has in mind. It could be anything from a relationship to marriage to something related to business or a job or finance, money. We are living in a society where sex is more and more a commodity that men are willing to pay for. In the film Sartre par lui-même by Alexandre Astruc, and featuring also one of our favorite people, Simone de Beauvoir, Austrian-French existentialist philosopher André Gorz asks Sartre a number of questions, beginning with, when did you realize you were ugly? I wish someone had asked me that years ago so I wouldn't hear it from women in the course of breakup conversations. And by the way, you're ugly. What Sartre tells Gorz is that his realization of his ugliness led him to his idea of contingency, a key concept in the existentialist philosophy of Jean-Paul Sartre. Realization of his ugliness was when he realized that there was both contingency and brutality. Contingency is to exist without rhyme or reason. Contingency is existing without having the right to exist. Sartre speaks about the desacralization of the body, with which we experience rough and even brutal relations. To quote Sartre, I met girls who thought of themselves as beautiful, and what alienation that represents. Sacralization and alienation. People ought to be ordinary, but someone who thinks of him or herself as handsome or beautiful has to assume a stance, an attitude of bodily alienation as a result of sacralization of the body. What is more, he or she has a need to be noticed by others as if beauty is something others bestow on you. To repeat, what is more, he or she, this person that Sartre is talking about who thinks of him or herself as handsome or beautiful, that person has a need to be noticed by others as if beauty is something others bestow on you. Then Sartre adds, for a long time I mistook generosity for freedom, and vice versa. If one is generous, is one by virtue of that free? And if one is free, by virtue of that, is one generous? Makes me think of Sartre's extremely famous remark, I was never so free as I was under the occupation. This whole matter leads us to ask the question, what do you do if you want a relationship or a marriage and you have this realization that you are ugly? We did a series of podcasts about this a while ago, The Unattractive Person's Guide to How to Get a Date. The Unattractive Person's Guide to How to Get Laid. We proposed an interesting way of doing that, which is to go around every day looking at the most unattractive individuals of your desired sex as possible and pretending that you were in love with them. Perhaps that's the way to do it. And look at yourself in the mirror, in the long mirror, so you see not only your face but your entire body, and look at yourself realistically, pragmatically. Look at yourself with the brutality of the gaze, the brutality of the mirror stage, as Jacques Lacan would call it. then come to that very important realization. Don't wait for your wife or your husband to get sick of looking at you. You're not going to get any better. While we are on the subject of Jean-Paul Sartre, brings to mind an arguably humorous episode in my personal life. I received an urgent text message from a woman I was in a relationship with at the time. The text message was as follows. In 15 minutes, I'm scheduled to make my presentation on the subject of Jean-Paul Sartre and Michel Foucault. However, I have no idea how to pronounce their names. I believe it is Sartre and Foucault. Needless to say, I saved that young woman a considerable amount of embarrassment by advising her of the correct pronunciations in advance. That having been said, I'm not exactly the person best qualified to provide accurate pronunciations in the French language. What it's all about really is within reach, or at least within the psychoanalyst's reach, and he bears witness to that fact when he talks about something serious and not about his therapeutic results. What is within reach is the fact that sexuality makes a whole in truth. Thanks to our sponsor, Jacques Lacan, for this enlightening message. Then I see that the notable and worthy Nicole Desdon tells us that we are most powerful when we are most vulnerable. Is that how you feel in your relationship or in your marriage? You hear the expression, let down your defenses. That simply doesn't happen. It's like growing limp, like you were told to do in some spiritual exercises. But that's only a pose. Your mind is never limp. It can play limp just like I can play John Wick. One acts for oneself, for one's unrelenting, sleepless audience of one, you. We can talk about Lacan's ideas of the self, and they are extremely worthwhile, and Freud's ego, superego, and id. But there is also the internal audience, the Roger Ebert in your head. You're always reviewing yourself, even if you're being tough and aggressive or shooting a bunch of people like the lead character in Wong Kar-wai's Fallen Angel does. Am I holding my gun the right way? He's asking as he shoots the next half-dozen people in the restaurant. This is one of the burdens of being human, and it can stand in the way of self-acceptance. Let's not get schmaltzy and call it self-love with all the hearts and flowers that conjures up. Enough schmaltz already. There's enough on Hallmark TV. There's enough on half the Netflix movies you see, or probably by now 82.2% of the Netflix movies you see. That's why I don't watch them. This relates to our section on Jean-Paul Sartre, and how someone who thinks of himself or herself as handsome or beautiful has to assume that stance, an attitude of body alienation as a result of sacralization of the body. What is more, he or she has a need to be noticed by others as if beauty is something others bestow on you. I guarantee you that your inner Roger Ebert is someone who notices you whether or not you want him to. If you spiked his drink and he passed out, you would pass out too. But I just can't get out of my mind this whole statement by Lacan that sexuality makes a whole in truth. Hey, I'm not going to go down some lengthy Lacanian avenue from his écrit or any of the other lectures or seminars that he gave. What I'm just going to do is talk about it from my own perspective. If sexuality makes a whole in truth, does that mean that the assumptions that we make and call them true get punctured by sexuality, by the fact of sexuality, not just the sexual act, but sexuality is something that occupies a large portion of many people's consciousness and is a goal or aim in terms of its objects for many people, even if they settle into a married relationship, that sort of thing. Nicole Desdon, sitting up on the side, and we always appreciate her comments no matter what they happen to be because they're enlightening and make us think. So Nicole tells us that most people use love as a sedative. My comment to that, of which she heartily approves, of course, is when one gives love, one feels a certain sense of relief. Ah, I've done it. Temptation is gone. I'm now on the straight and narrow path. I can have sex every once in a while, but mostly I can relax. Oh, you tell me there's another person involved? Well, in a certain sense, it could be anyone. But what is truth, anyway, if it can be so easily punctured, or maybe not so easily punctured? Maybe that's the whole idea, to puncture our notion of what is true, whatever that may be. Back to Alain Badiou's comment that there are several things in life called events that occur in areas such as sciences and mathematics and politics and the arts. Arnold Schoenberg's invention of the 12-tone technique, for example. And those create new definitions of reality, but actually in another way, they create new truths. So maybe what Lacan, who very much influenced, actually, Alain Badiou, just as it so happens, meant when he said that love creates a whole in truth. Love makes a whole in truth, perhaps opening us up to new truths, independent of the old ones. There are two topics that were sort of left over from the last time, and they're kind of obvious topics, so I'm going to state them right up front. Make-up sex versus revenge sex. Let's start with the former, make-up sex. I don't think make-up sex exists. It's a fantasy people have. If you could solve your problems in your relationship or your marriage by sex, you would have solved those problems already. Got me on that one? Sex is a solution to some things. You're sitting around and you're bored, and your partner isn't as exciting as she or he used to be, maybe. Well, just go and have sex. I guess people have substances they use in order to get them excited. I'm not so much into that, although I have known people who are. I'm not talking about anything other than what's referred to politely as weed. Let's just consider the fact that if there had been something that could have been solved in your relationship, and here I'm repeating myself, by sex, it would have been solved a long time ago. There are fundamental things that people disagree about. People don't get along in terms of money. They don't get along in terms of where they're going to live. They don't get along in terms of bleeping furniture. They don't get along in terms of how many children they're going to have or how the children are going to get raised. Any of those things. They don't get along in terms of their jobs. They talk about their jobs and they have these tremendous fights about working. He's working too long or not working hard enough, or she needs to make more money, or she needs to stay home with the kids more, those things. And going to bed and having sex of any kind, he goes down on her and performs the most amazing cunnilingus of her life. You know, he needs some practice to be able to do that, but let's say all of a sudden he becomes a master at going down on women. And she has this big orgasm, and after the orgasm, the problems with the house and the job and the kids and all of that are still there on the table. So the morning comes along, you're talking about these same things, and the same problems are there, and this kind of, make-up sex, if you want to call it that, or problem-solving sex, ain't done a thing. It ain't done a thing. Bear that in mind. If you have that in your mind, if you have that as a premise, a proposition that you think is going to help at that most difficult moment in your life. You think that she's had that conversation of, we have to talk. And somehow at the end of that conversation, we talked about that the last time. We have to talk means, from the side of the woman, we're breaking up. I am breaking up with you. And if somehow you twist her arm and get her into the bedroom or wherever, you ain't going to do a thing, no matter what you do to her. No matter what she does to you. It's not going to solve the problem. It's there. It's there. Sex ain't going to solve it. Let's turn the coin over, though, and talk about revenge sex. Say your partner has broken up with you all of a sudden, and you're mad as hell. Say your partner has not broken up with you, but has done something really, really crummy. It can be a lot of things, financial things, slept with someone else, ruined your credit rating, done a lot of things like that, or simply leaping left you. The thing to do is to have revenge sex. And they don't have to know about it, but it is so, so delightful if they do. Go have sex, revenge sex, and I will promise you something. Revenge sex is the best sex you will ever have in your entire life, because you're feeling this added emotion of revenge. Think of how many movies and plays in the whole history of drama, in the whole history of opera, in the whole history of cinema that you've seen, which are based on the notion of revenge. Revenge is a basic story of mankind. It's a basic story of human passion. It's a basic story of high emotion. And when you add that to sex, baby, it's something. And the person you're having sex with, by the way, is going to feel that, whether you're a woman or a man. You go and have sex with a woman, that's revenge on your former wife or your existing wife or girlfriend. Man, is she going to have a great time, because you're turned on more than any man that she's ever been with has been turned on. And you turn it the other way around, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. You're having sex with somebody and all that welled up, stored up passion is there in your loins, in your head, and every part of the body. And you're going to give her the best orgasm, if you'll pardon the expression, she's ever had in her entire life. And the problem is that she may just go and say, hey, Randolph, I want to be with you until the end of your life, and I promise you that I'm going to give you the same kind of sex until you curl up in your grave. Well, you don't necessarily have to make that commitment. It's only been one night or one day, whatever. But that's the deal. That's the deal. Make-up sex, nada. Niet. No. Revenge sex, oh yeah, baby. Give me more. Society and the media and artists, everybody, all these institutions of communication and imagery are always trying to tell us that what is important to men are women with substantial breasts and other such characteristics. There was a woman on Instagram who described herself as, I'm 21 years old, I'm divorced, I'm 5'1" tall, and I have 3 good holes. Well, there's a woman who's getting right down to basics, if you want to ask me. Women, on the other hand, in the opinion of this podcast, are the ones who choose and for whom physical characteristics of the man are the most important thing. When a man is making love, having sex, as long as the woman has 3 good holes, although many men only explore 2 of those, which is absolutely fine with me. Some men explore only 1 of those holes of the women, and they're missing out on something, in my opinion. As long as a woman is capable of experiencing some type of physicality with the man, either through oral sex or through vaginal penetrative sex, that's fine with the guy. As for women, as far as penetrative sex, it is extremely important for them, and women will tell you this all the time, that the man is well hung, has a substantial piece of junk, as people say, down there, and can keep it hard, and that it be long. 8 or 9 inches is great for a woman. Certainly anything below around 6 is problematic, we'll just say, because it makes it very difficult for them to have a vaginal orgasm. And studies have proven, and we've talked about that in this podcast several times, that what women want is a true, deep, lasting vaginal orgasm. Honestly, this is not something that they can really get through oral sex, that is, through cunnilingus. They can get that through vaginal penetration. And that is that is the one thing, actually, that is better for a woman to have sex with a man with than to have sex with another woman. These are why more women are not lesbians. If it were not for this, women would all be lesbians, in the opinion of this podcast. Love is giving something you don't have to someone who doesn't want it. A very famous statement by French psychoanalyst and philosopher Jacques Lacan. Something to think about. Do men talk about love in order to get sex? Do women talk about love in order to get security, even the security of a relationship? Love is not giving an empty box of candy. To give love is to give yourself in the grandest sense, including all of your pain and your doubts and your grand dreams and illusions. To receive love is to be open to all of these things. If you lack the self-confidence to receive all of this, then say no. If you have that, then take it in gloriously, profoundly. They say that self-love is the most important thing, and I've disputed that in a couple of episodes of this podcast. What it is not self-love, which implies a certain type of narcissism, in my opinion. It is self-confidence. It is the belief that you can go into something and sustain it and conquer it, be the master of it, as well as being the servant of it. There should be no difference. If you are the master, you're also the servant. You're also the person who's making it happen all the time. It takes self-confidence to be a builder, like the character in Francis Coppola's latest film, Megalopolis. If you don't mind my mentioning that film. Self-confidence, self-assurance, self-belief. Believe in yourself. Don't love yourself. Believe. Believe deeply. Believe so much that you can take it upon yourself to be passive in situations, in sexual situations in particular. It takes a self-confident man to have that sort of ability to be passive. And you can turn this around, and much of what I'm saying applies to women as well. Men and women cheat for different reasons. Women cheat as often as men do, but you don't hear as much about it as men cheating on women. Men are embarrassed to use their wives cheating as a grounds for breaking up with them or for divorce. They're admitting a certain shame, inadequacy in public. Women cheat, or sometimes just have sex, whether you want to call that cheating or not, to prove to themselves that they are attractive enough for another man to want to have sex with them. Of course, sometimes they cheat for what we'll call mercenary purposes, to get a better job or even to re-experience something they had with a former husband or boyfriend. I was talking to a woman friend just last night, and she was talking, as women sometimes do, about their former lovers or boyfriends or dating partners, whatever. She said with a chuckle, he was a great lover, fabulous lover, but he was crazy. You know, they want to relive that. If a woman has that type of astonishing sexual experience, that's always going to be in her mind. It is the opinion of this podcast, as frequently expressed, that women have more profound sexual experiences than men do. Men paw a woman, then ejaculate. Women really have this deep vaginal bodily orgasm. But for both genders, it all comes down to ego. It's easy to say, well, if you love yourself, you won't need to use sex to boost your self-esteem. But that's easier said than done. And sometimes it's not that easy to come up with an excuse for not having sex. The woman's out of town and she's sitting in a bar. She's flattered that a man wants to buy her drinks. Or more likely, he's someone with a work connection. What it all comes down to is that sex is a lifelong learning experience. You talk about lifelong learning. You know, they have community colleges that offer lifelong learning. All kinds of people offer lifelong learning. Well, sex is a lifelong learning experience. You begin with a vocabulary of 50 words, and maybe you end up with a vocabulary of 500, if you're lucky. Increase your sexual vocabulary. Then the woman cheats with a man who gives her the orgasm of her life, either because he's exceptionally well endowed, or, more likely, because he's a master of giving her oral sex. The last thing we want to do in this podcast is to put cunnilingus down. Cunnilingus plus deep penetration vaginal orgasm with a large member is what women want, what really gets them off. So what's she supposed to do after that? Go home and tell her husband or boyfriend that she wants him to do it, to show or teach him how to do it? How was she supposed to explain that? Well, you know, I was in Salt Lake City and Well, you know, I was in Salt Lake City 2 weeks ago, and there was this guy that I'd known in college, and I met him up in a bar, and he took me back to a hotel, and he fucked the bejesus out of me, 'cause he's so well hung. Oh, my goodness. Alice, shut the bleep up. Some women are stuck for years with men who don't know anything beyond wham bam, thank you ma'am sex. As long as the woman is moaning and groaning and he ejaculates, that's fine with him. There are men out there who prey on stuck women. But of course, those men have no loyalty at all. The woman knows that it's a one-night stand or a one-week fling, and there will be nothing beyond that. Do women just get up and leave because their husbands or boyfriends are lousy and unteachable lovers? You hear of it sometimes. But women are taught from their earliest childhood in a certain way to put up and shut up. And if the husband or boyfriend gives the woman lots of money and a great lifestyle, it's hard to walk away from that. Couples go through the whole family and children deal and just live with it. I guess it goes without saying that there are workshops and classes. I could recommend some if you're interested, some really good ones. But first, both woman and man have to agree that there's a problem, and the man is never, or almost never, going to agree that any part of the issue derives from them. A man's sexual prowess is at the heart of his ego, his self-esteem, his identity. And for a woman to tear that down leaves him what? Saying to himself, well, I'm a good mechanic or attorney or Amazon driver or even father, except. And that's the big except, the big vacancy, the big absence, the big hole, the big, let's just say it, inadequacy. And once it's on the table in plain sight in the relationship, it is going to nullify him. So, what's he going to do? Go super macho? Take up boxing or get a fast car or work on it until it makes lots and lots of noise? Have an affair and hope some other woman will validate him in the sack? Go to a sex worker for that purpose? And honestly, that is something a good sex worker should do. Make a man feel whole again. Sounds like politics. make a man feel whole again, make a man feel great again, real again, or maybe even for the first time. The danger, if it is that he may fall in love with a sex worker, and then what do either of them do? It's a tough world out there, boys and girls, as far as sex is concerned. There are things that people can compromise on, and others they can't. One of the forms in which love manifests itself is sexual love, which, if it is taken separately, gives us a bad sense of real satisfaction. A quotation. Sigmund Freud. I regard sexual privation as the ultimate cause of the neuroses. Freud. Your podcaster jumps in for a second and says, what constitutes sexual privation? For the woman, is it lack of deep orgasm? For the man, is it a sense of loyalty to a woman through all of the stuff of married life, all the furor and effluvium of children, and buying and selling houses and all that without any sense of masculinity, any sense that he is really getting off sexually? Sexual privation. I regard sexual privation as the ultimate cause of the neuroses. Sigmund Freud. Sublimation is nonetheless satisfaction of the drive without repression. In other words, for the moment, I am not fucking. I'm talking to you. Well, I can have exactly the same satisfaction as if I were fucking. Jacques Lacan, Seminar 11, The Four Fundamental Concepts, pages 165, 1964. You must realize that what I've told you about men's relationships with his body hinges entirely on the fact that man says that the body, his body, is something he has. Just saying his means that he owns it like a piece of furniture. This has nothing to do with anything that allows the subject to be defined in any strict sense. The subject can be defined in a correct way only through that which forms a relation, through that which means that a subject is a signifier inasmuch as he is represented alongside another signifier. Jacques Lacan, The Writing of the Ego, Seminar 23, The Synthome. To repeat one sentence from that, which I regard as extremely important, you really must realize that what I've told you about man's relationship with his body hinges entirely on the fact that man says the body, his body, is something he has. My gloss on that is something he has, not something he is. In my opinion, first a man and a woman need to relate based on some commonality of interests. If there is passion there in the conversation and the interaction and the mutual helping, then the passion will carry through to the sexual part of the relationship. This is my understanding of Jacques Lacan's famous statement, there is no such thing as a sexual relationship. A very wise person online read the statement by me, and she said, everything is a sexual relationship. Toss that around upstairs or downstairs. Neurosis is a failed perversion. Jacques Lacan. Think about it. A failed perversion. When one gives love, one feels a certain sense of relief. I've done it. Temptation is gone. I am now on the straight and narrow path. I can have sex every once in a while, but mostly I can relax. Oh, you tell me there's another person involved? Well, in a certain way, it could be anyone. I must choose either to cease from suffering or to cease from loving. So just as in the beginning, love is formed by desire, so afterwards love is kept in existence only by painful anxiety. I felt that part of Albertine's life was escaping me. Love, as in the painful anxiety, as in the blissful desire, is the insistence upon a whole. It exists, it is born, it survives, only if some part remains for it to conquer. Marcel Proust, In Search of Lost Time, Volume 6, Albertine Gone, 1925. Freud accentuates so firmly from the time of his very first writings that desire in the repressed unconscious is indestructible. I've been indicating to you how the entire development of his life's work is undertaken to examine this riddle. Jacques Lacan, Seminar 4, The Object Relation. Love is just lust with jealousy added. Lars von Trier, Nymphomaniac, is spoken by my favorite actress, Charlotte Gainsbourg. Screw My Ex-Husband, the Fucking Asshole, and Other Poems by Leslie Johnson. So every time you say anything outrageous, or even just silly, G. Willikers, append to it, G. Willikers, and Other Poems by Bob Smith. Life will be much easier, and you will soon develop a literary reputation, second to none. My car was stuck in traffic in front of a senior citizens center a few days ago, and some 70-something-year-old dude was rocking out to geriatric radio to a song by the Beatles called Paperback Writer. And some of the lyrics stuck in my mind. It's a dirty story of a dirty man, and his clinging wife doesn't understand. It's a steady job, but he wants to be a paperback writer. So the Daily Mail is a rather humorous and occasionally controversial British publication, once a tabloid, still a tabloid, but now online, which talks about Taylor Swift and other controversial matters. So in the Daily Mail, a certain Emily Joshu, health reporter for that publication, writes the following. Doctors have revealed the penis size and shape that American women find most attractive and expect will perform well in bed, confirming the stereotype that bigger is better. The findings, which come from 3 studies in academic journals, show that women prefer larger, girthier penises. And make sure to keep that trimmed, but not completely bald. No waxing, guys. Don't do that. Men with well-groomed pubic hair are seen as good in bed and better pleasers than men who keep it unkempt. The findings come as more men opt for cosmetic surgery, from BBLs, the controversial butt lift procedure, to daddy do-overs. In fact, scientists report that 1 in 15 males seek procedures of this type to change the size and shape of their penises. In the age of dating apps, it's become more commonplace for men to send potential matches explicit photos of their penises. Penises which were wider, longer, and moderately hairy were perceived more positively in terms of personality and sexual appeal. This included them being seen as more attractive, with their targets being good in bed and pleasers. However, shorter and narrower penises were seen as less sexually attractive, with their targets being pillow princesses and worse in bed. Those with long pubic hair were seen as less agreeable, less open to new experience, most likely to have the smallest number of sexual partners compared with men with trimmed or no pubic hair. Well, first you heard it here on Explore Ecstatic Sensuality. Beyond what this article from the Daily Mail reports, other research proves that women prefer men with long penises based on evolution. They are healthy overall, as are their offspring. It all has to do with what Charles Darwin told us about the survival of the species, the human species. So, you women out there, do your thing for humanity. Have children with a guy with a penis as described here in the Daily Mail. And if you are considering marrying a man with a small penis, drop him. That is one important way to have the best possible marriage or relationship, which, just to remind you, is the theme and title of this podcast. Tell him to listen to this podcast episode. Tell him that the best thing for him to do is to go trans. Remind him that that's what old Charlie Darwin would want him to do. Now we are going to speak about fun. Fun. Do adults talk so much about fun? Well, sometimes we do. When I reach adulthood, I doubtless will. How many people have fun on their jobs? How many people are actually instructed to pretend that they're having fun on their jobs? I can think of my Trader Joe's location. A little bit too much artificial friendliness amongst the staff and to the customers. However, there are many, many jobs which are sheer drudgery, where one has little interaction with one's co-workers. Some of these jobs one has no possibility of promotion or training to do anything else. One just does the job, whatever the job is. Who typed all day? A long time ago there were typists who typed all day. The well-known film director King Vidor has wonderful scenes in a film, I think it was called The Crowd, from the 1920s sometime, and there were scenes of a room full of people typing vigorously, row after row, on old-fashioned typewriters, manual typewriters. But that's not the only way in which jobs can be drudgery. Bosses, by definition, can be drudgery. Let me tell you, if you step out of line a little bit, or sometimes if you are too friendly, too open to your boss, they will assume that you are elevating yourself to the same level as they are, and they won't like it. They got where they are, and they intend to treat all the people below them as what they are, underlings. Underlings has a meaning. What is the old saying in the entertainment industry? Where I labor, mercifully and mercilessly. I call it the law of the elevator. Be nice to the people you meet on the way up, because you'll encounter them again on the way down. However, this does not so much apply to so many businesses. Many offices and other businesses, the employees kind of have nice relationships and friendships and develop friendships out of their jobs. Their entire lives are based in one way or another on their jobs. Their friends, their social networks, aside from their families, this is how they live and what they live for. Paycheck to paycheck. And how many of my listeners have not lived like that at any time in their lives? And sometimes one does that when one is in one's 20s, and you say to yourself, this isn't going to be the case for a long time. This isn't going to be my life. I'm going to be able to advance and buy a home and get married and have little kiddies. And instead, what are these people doing? They're working at these, what they call entry-level jobs. That always sounded to me like a sexual term, entry-level. But where were we? Oh yes, we were talking about fun. If you are not going to have that much fun in the rest of your life, and things like sporting events for a lot of people are fun. We as intellectuals don't have those sorts of fun so much. We go to a concert at the Disney Concert Hall downtown in Los Angeles, and how many of those people in the audience are actually having fun? Basically, if you start having fun, someone in the row behind you or the seat next to you is going to look at you like you're not taking this seriously. you're not really appreciating Bruckner's Eighth Symphony like we all are. It's a time for quiet and time for repose. I believe the Los Angeles Philharmonic had an ad campaign, or maybe has one still, called "It's All in the Moment." And it's kind of like, oh, we're having these wonderful moments that are totally unshared except more or less theoretically. And that's nice. I go to these things from time to time when I can afford them. Yeah, that's quite nice. But fun should be what you have when you go home or go someplace with the person you're interested in having sex with, or the person you are having sex with, or if you are in the R word, if you're in a relationship. That's what it's all about. Having fun. Realizing that now, wait a minute, I'm with someone I love or like or tolerate, and we're going to have some fun. A pleasant contrast to everything else. We're going to look for ways to have fun outside of the home environment, but we're going to have fun in the home environment. For some people, it's playing cards, and that was sort of never the thing that enticed me too terribly. But now we're going to move to the Schlafzimmer, as they'd say in German, the sleep room, the bedroom. And when one is in the bedroom, doing the thing, well, there are obvious ways to have fun. The woman does a striptease. That can be nice. It can be very, very nice. The guy does a striptease. Well, the guy's embarrassed about that, but even with his wife, that can be nice too. They undress each other in a sexy way, and even after a long time of relationship, that can be nice. That can be quite nice. But you're actually on that surface that people use for procreation and a bunch of other things. Procreation and copulation. So you're there, and now we move to the sexually explicit portion of today's episode. Censors, just pay close attention to this. I read an article in the Daily Mail. I think we mentioned the Daily Mail several times in this particular episode, and it was won by one of these very attractive blonde sex workers who looks like she's going to be 30 years old in 6 months for the rest of her life. And she will be, because after all, she's a sex expert. If you want to have longevity, that's the way to do it. Look at me, I'm going to be 39 years old forever. And this article went on for many, many paragraphs. And it was very kind of like, not exactly technical. It was about positions. What position should you be in? The point of this being, what position is most likely to give a woman an orgasm? Well, that's a good premise. That's a good place to start. It's a really good place to start. And if you kind of move beyond that, what is the general hypothesis of this article, which she demonstrates quite well? The best position for a woman to have sex in is the one where her clitoris is stimulated by her lover's, her husband's, whatever's, penis as it goes in and out. Or in some cases, like rubs around backwards and forwards, whatever. Well, hello? What could be more obvious? But to achieve this requires communication between the two. Sometimes a guy just doesn't get it. And the moans and groans from Molly or Peggy or Jane down there or up there ain't going to show him what to do. Ain't going to show him what's best for her. So ask her. Ask her. And for the woman, tell him. Tell him when your clit is being really, really given a good time down there. And then we can go into the G-spot, which is also something really fun to approach with the phallus of the man. But let's begin with the basic thing. And yes, you can read articles like this, and yes, it's interesting to talk about different positions and to read about them and see illustrations of them, but the proof, nevertheless, is in the pudding. Then there's this thing called pornography. Ever heard of that? It is widely disparaged by certain people. I personally don't disparage it, although quite a bit of it is rather boring, if you want my opinion, because it really doesn't show you practically what to do. And I'm not talking about a form of pornography, which is like a YouTube video on how to gap spark plugs in a 97 Mercedes E320. Although maybe those are sexy for some people, I don't know. I'm not talking about something that is similar in some ways to IKEA assembly instructions. How to have sex based on IKEA assembly instructions. That would be interesting. I should prepare one of those. I should stop and mention before we proceed that there are now a lot of online sites for men, and onlyfans.com is one of them. There's a woman who befriends you on Facebook, or you see on Facebook, and you click, maybe even click back and forth, and then at some point she discreetly advises you that she has an OnlyFans page. So you go to her OnlyFans page and you subscribe to her on OnlyFans for a certain amount of money payable every month. But during that time period you don't see very much. What you do see are suggestions from her that you can, for $60, see a video of her masturbating. Okay. The world in which we live in, as Paul McCartney once said, live and let die, many years ago. But any video, for example, that really shows interesting penetration techniques and positions, and very few of them do, not that I'm an expert, but very few of them do. Some are kind of interesting videos on fellatio, showing how a woman very effectively performs that activity. Cunnilingus is a lot more difficult to film. However, there are videos that address that. And is watching these porno videos a sexy experience in and of itself? Is it a turn on in and of itself? Well, it can be. But in a certain way, you might approach them, as I mentioned a moment ago, as educational training videos. How to gap that spark plug. And why not? I say elsewhere in this podcast episode that love is a lifelong learning experience, and sex is a lifelong learning experience, just like being human is a lifelong learning experience. To state the obvious, which is apparently not that obvious to a lot of people and a lot of couples, and that is that men should feel good when they have sex. Not just pleasure in having sex, but actually feel good about themselves. And it's not about the woman lying there saying, oh, you're so great, you're fantastic, you're amazing, you're such a fantastic lover. Oh, No, it ain't about that. What it's about is the whole situation, the entire lovemaking episode or instance should give the man a feeling of masculinity, give the man a feeling of what they call prowess. That's a really interesting word. You don't so much hear about a woman's sexual prowess. I don't think I've ever heard that in terms of a woman. But a man is brought up believing that he has to demonstrate his sexual prowess. Even if, as a very young fellow, he goes to a sex worker, that's often what he's interested in doing. He's not so much interested in pawing this perfectly nice sex worker who's getting some money from him, or, ejaculating when he's inside a woman's body rather than inside his hand or some fruit or vegetable. What he's interested in is demonstrating his sexual prowess, that he can do it, whatever it is in terms of the definition that he has in his own mind. This is not a minor issue for men. How many men have sex almost entirely to show off their sexual prowess? Come on, guy. just have a good time doing it. Give the woman some pleasure, obviously, when you're doing it. Have some pleasure yourself, obviously, when you're doing it. Have fun, as we've said elsewhere in this episode, while you're doing it. But for the woman, show appreciation. Show appreciation not necessarily for his great technique, but just for him as a male being who has engaged in this activity for you, which he, if he's the right kind of a guy, really, really wanted you to get pleasure and enjoyment from. That's what he wants. Sexual prowess, as redefined by this podcast episode, should be the pride of the achievement of giving the woman pleasure. Not so much, hey, I'm Mr. Macho and I've managed to get her in the sack, even if she's his wife. It should be the pride of giving the woman he's with pleasure. But yes, it is pride. It is prowess. The prowess of giving the woman sexual pleasure. The prowess of achieving a fantastic togetherness, which is really not possible in any walk of life, in any activity of life other than sex. You're not going to get a feeling of prowess, of this kind of prowess, believe me, if you're an attorney and the jury comes back and you're representing the defendant and they say, not guilty, and that's a sense of achievement. Achievement is different from our definition of prowess. Prowess is puissant. It's a matter of power, not power over something. Power inside yourself that you can share with someone else, with the woman you're with, for purposes of their pleasure, their satisfaction, and honestly inciting love, inciting a special kind of togetherness, which will carry over throughout your activities, through the day, through the weeks, through the month, through the years, through the children and the grandchildren, and through the instance where one or the other of you leaves this world. Think about how you're going to feel. It's not easy, from what I'm told. It's not easy from personal experience in a certain way. That's the kind of togetherness. That's the kind of devotion, a word we haven't used elsewhere, devotion, that you as a man and she as a woman wish to share together, a shared devotion. Oh boy. Are we recording? It really doesn't matter the things I do, as long as I can do them with you. Oh my goodness, you're still here. Hello, my delightful listeners. Welcome back to the Knotty Pine Room of the Hotel Eisenhower, whence this broadcast is coming to you live this evening. There are some remaining issues indeed to discuss in the issue of the R word, relationships. Sounds more evil the more often you say it, and perhaps they are at the end of the day. One thing I've discovered personally, and other people have reported to me also in response to the millions of inquiries I receive for my podcast, is the fact that as one gets to know someone, you understand their quirks, and if you will, tolerate them a little bit. What do I mean by that? We have an acquaintance with someone, and they're always talking about the latest baseball scores. Okay, that's a fairly simplistic example. Or they tend to be over-concentrated on certain things. Certain food preferences, or politics is one thing. People become obsessed by politics, and not only in election years. But people also just have small quirks. They repeat saying things. You take them out to lunch, or they take you out to lunch, and they do little things that are simply annoying. And other people, in a certain way, really are annoying. It's a sad thing to say. I wish they weren't, but they annoy the hell out of me sometimes. So you get into a relationship, and you're into this 6-month, it's funny to call it a 6-month honeymoon period. You know, all you're doing is having sex. Pretty much, you're having sex. A curious thing, by the way, is that many commentators on relationships say that if you're in this kind of situation, a one-night stand, obviously, but a situation where you're having sex once or twice a week, and what do? If you're at her house, are you expected to leave immediately after sex or vice versa? And I've heard very intelligent people commentating on this saying, yes, people have been together for years, and they say, I'm never going to spend the night with you. I'm never going to sleep with you. The thing about sleeping, that's an interesting expression. Well, are you sleeping together? No, we're just having sex. People should really be specific about that, because sleeping with someone is a different experience from having sex with them in all kinds of ways. The thing we brought up before is snoring. People gasp during snoring. It's quite disturbing. It really is really bizarre. I had a girlfriend for a while, and I finally told her, you know, baby, I think you've got sleep apnea, because you're snoring in such a way, and then you simply stop breathing. And I wonder, wait a minute, is she still alive? And then there's this big, and she's breathing again. Very, very weird. Very, very, very strange. So sleeping with someone is really very, very different from having sex. I kind of like curling up with someone and my lover falling asleep in my arms, or vice versa. She's cradling me. This is really nice, and this is what I call intimate. And sex, per se, in and of itself, is not necessarily intimate. It can be athletic. For a lot of people, it is athletic, especially for men, but for women too. They get into the athletics of sex, which is fine. They could go down to one of those famous gymnasia, Equinox, or the other, they call LA Fitness, and they could do that whole kind of stuff, and they could be doing lifting weights, or they could be doing all kinds of things. Those machines, man, they make you go that. When I was going to the gym, they made me go make those sounds a lot. So, that's kind of a form of sex. And there's, heavy breathing and ejaculation. Ejaculation, I know. It's the one. I'm in my vocalizing mood this evening, but then there's a whole different kind of thing. As I said a moment ago, you're cuddling with someone. You're caressing them slightly in a sort of post-coital way. You're expressing your enjoyment, not love. We're not going to call it love. You're expressing your enjoyment, your satisfaction with the experience that you just had with this person. And other people I know, I don't know if I entirely agree, but have said, sex itself is an experience of love, even if it's a pickup, a one-night stand. Never quite understood pickups. It's an interesting thing, but I'll let authorities on that have their sway, have their day on that topic. And in the context of waking up with someone, that's really interesting, to wake up with someone for the first time, or any time. Really different. You're awake and you're seeing that person you've had sex with the previous night still asleep. And hopefully it's a nice and lovely sleep. On the other hand, the other person gets up before you and says, I got to run, I got to work, I'm terribly, terribly late, here's the way to lock the door behind you, bye. That's another thing that happens all the time. It's happened to me, and I've done it to women. That's just how these things work. Or there's the kind of nice morning version where someone says, what do you like in your coffee? Well, I'm more of a tea drinker. Okay, I'll see if I have any. That kind of morning. And it's a morning where they're kind of looking at each other. You're looking at that person you've had sex with the night before. You look in their eyes. You look for something. You look for, dare I say it, feedback. Feedback. A lot of us are looking for feedback in our lovemaking because maybe we don't know how to pick up on that from the experience itself. It's important to understand the other person's reaction to everything that you're doing, to be sensitive to that. But feedback, people really do want it in some fashion. And it's that morning after when the feedback process, where the feedback activity can really happen. It's that eye contact thing. It's the small gestures. Are you, as a guy, going to take the liberty of caressing her shoulder or something along those lines? Are you going to smile? Of course you're going to smile. But what is that smile going to say? What are those gestures going to say? You don't want them to say too much, because that might mean that you're interested in a relationship. And you can get the idea, she's not interested in a relationship, or the other way around. She is interested in a relationship, and that's not necessarily based on the fact that you're a phenomenal lover. That could just be that she's a lonely person, and all her friends are in relationships, and she would kind of like to be in a relationship too. And you meet certain criteria. You're male. You have a satisfactory organ hanging between your legs that is capable of remaining erect for a satisfactory period of time, which is really essential. If it isn't, she's not going to think very much of you. Arguably, if you are doing the right sort of things in sex and you have given her an orgasm, which for me is the fun part of sex. If you don't give a woman an orgasm, what the bleep are you doing there? But if you have indeed, one way or another, and we all know the various ways of which work better than others, if you have given her an orgasm, is she going to be more conducive, more receptive, or more interested in the idea of having a relationship? Interesting question. That's part of the mix. Here's a guy with a apparently stable personality and lifestyle. Here's a guy who doesn't have any visible quirks, at least not yet. Here's a guy who has gone to the effort, if you want to call it that, of making sure that I have an orgasm. He's picked me up. I've taken him home with me, and he's given me an orgasm. That's a pretty good deal, as opposed to he's picked me up, he's gone back to my place, he's gone wham, bam, thank you, man, in and out, in and out, in and out, a few grabs at my breasts and buttocks, and that's the deal. So here he is in the morning, after this less than phenomenal evening, and here he is at my breakfast table, coffee table, whatever it is, and he's sort of like, has that very masculine, satisfied look. Like, of course, I came over, I fucked you. What else could you want? What else could you possibly want? Here I am. I'm the guy. I'm very masculine. I did what guys do. And you're sitting there thinking, wait a minute. How desperate am I to have a relationship? Do I want to see this guy again? He probably doesn't want to see me. It's that matter of looking. She's looking for feedback from him. Is she just another vagina in the way that he sees her? What's the deal? Is he seeing her as someone that he would like to take around and hang out with his friends or go to office parties with or something like that? Is he evaluating her that way? Evaluation, mutual evaluation, having a list of criteria. I'm not the first person to talk about this. Other very smart people have said, well, women have a list of criteria on the basis of which they are evaluating men. So the guy is sitting there saying, well, wait a minute, which is she checked off for me? Or he's doing the same. That's how this world works. And I think in the algorithmic world, I previously called this the era of addiction, but I think another word for it might be the era of algorithms. Algorithms determine what things you're shown on the internet or on your phone. Every time you look at the screen, they're sending a message based on their evaluation of who you are. They evaluate you, they try to sell things to you, they see you as a consumer of certain products, because that's all we are now in modern society. We are consumers. We have no other identity other than that. Forget about everything else. That's who you are. And so there's the morning after. There's got to be a morning after that one night stand. There's got to be a morning after. Is this a guy I could stand? That sort of deal. All that having been said, let us return to those thrilling days of yesterday, that day on which the quirks of your potential partner, the woman or man you've been hanging out with, suddenly become okay with you. You anticipate them, you know they're going to happen, and they become part of the personality structure that you're quite capable of dealing with. We're all dealing with a whole, not with parts of a person. The whole person, not just certain aspects, not just their lovemaking, or their cooking abilities, or their ability to discuss Jacques Lacan with you, which of course would rate them very, very high on my scale. We could go through the écrit 16 times together and never take a breath. What a life. And that moment can be quite magical. It's happened to me. That moment where the person's picadillos and armadillos and other such things that were a little bit even annoying, irksome to me, suddenly become part of the whole of that person. And if I'm affectionate toward that person, if I even love that person, you take the whole thing in. We're a whole package. Like I said a moment ago, we can't just pick and choose the elements of a potential lover's or a lover's personality that we like and that are fun for us or pleasurable for us. It's the whole package. And you're the same. You're the same. They are reaching that moment, hopefully, when they accept you, when they like you, when they love you, even as a whole package. And that's the deal. That's love. That's life. This section began with the sound of one of my cats purring, just to give you a little bit of excitement this morning, or this evening, or whenever you're listening to this episode, brought to you live from the Knotty Pine Room of the Hotel Eisenhower in beautiful downtown Pensacola, Florida. In one of my novels, there is a scene in which an individual, a being, let's just call this being, the being that is one day going to be you, existing somewhere, is in a place that looks kind of like one of those places like the Clifford Clinton cafeteria. It used to be in downtown Los Angeles, or like a really big food courty sort of a place, but it's like all in one room, and the being that will become you goes around and makes a number of choices. And these choices, it turns out to be, on the one hand, attributes that you will happen when you emerge into someone somewhere, the being that is you, that will be you. And the other are things like places that you want to be, species that you want to be, but even more basic than that, like dimensions you want to exist in. And there are a number of dimensions. You've got a bunch of possibilities there. And the whole trivial thing like planets, but what cosmos, what universe, given that there may be parallel universes out there, what universe do you wish to materialize in? But is becoming an actualized being even a matter of becoming material? Materiality, is that a word? Is another one of the choices. But let's just assume for the moment that you, in the thing of becoming a species on Earth, and you decline the more attractive possibilities, like becoming a three-toed sloth, rather delightful species, becoming an amoeba. You can keep splitting all the way to eternity, or you can become a really great species known as the cat. But, okay, you're going to be human. Oh, man, how boring, how trivial. And then once you are in that human category, there's another kind of set of choices you have to make. Gender. Oh, my God, that's a toughie. It's not immediately obvious what gender you should choose. I mean, we are living in an era of a patriarchy. It's been that way for a long, long time, but there are advantages being on the other side of that equation, more nowadays than ever, although maybe not. And then you think about in terms of the pleasure and love, starting to figure out what that might be, you might get is either one of those genders. How much affection, how much care, how much concern, how many friends you're likely to have, how many lovers, and will they be good lovers or not, you're likely to have in one of those two genders. Let's assume for the moment that there are two. A kind of, in a sort of a basic level, in terms of how you pop out of the womb, that's kind of how it is, this two-gender business. Then you go through all the attributes, hair color and height and all that kind of stuff. And you get to choose all these things. Intelligence, whatever that means. Psychic powers, whatever they may be. Choosing all of these things. Ability to foresee the future or change the past. All these kind of things that you imagine might be offered to you. Some of them are offered to you and some of them are not. Shucks. You didn't opt for the better cafeteria where you might have more options. Guess you have to pay to enter that. So you get to choose all these things, and then you pop out and you get to find out, once you popped out, if you made the right choices. Because after all, these are things that you choose. Do they work or do they not work? If they don't work, you're basically screwed. If they do work, well, you were right in your predictions as to what would suit you best. Well, guess what? That ain't the way it works, boys and girls. We don't have those choices to make. We wish we did, but we don't. To repeat, it ain't the way it works. So we're left out there the way we are. Then there's this thing called procreation, this thing called having children, this thing called having a family, whatever a family means to you or should mean. The thing about carrying on the species in one way or another, one's line, one's family name. We've talked about that somewhere else before in this podcast. And then all of a sudden there's this notion of following the primrose path. Is that the expression? There's this notion of doing what is the societal precept for you. Doing the sort of thing that is going to gain you respect in your community. The thing that is going to make your employers shine on you. Whatever that model is. The 2.2 children, it's that 0.2 child running around all over the place. It really bothers me. What is that 0.2 child doing? This 0.2 children must be getting into a lot of trouble out there somewhere. So you follow that societal precept and you boogie along in that context, and then all of a sudden it ain't working for you. Something's missing from the equation. So we're back to that same old bugaboo. And again, I'm going to be referring to an article in Cue the Beatles, the Daily Mail. And today, as I record this, is another article in the Daily Mail about cheating. And this article about cheating is written in a kind of, boy, I wish I could write like that. It's like kind of almost porn, but not really, kind of romance novel, but a little bit sexier than that style. And these are allegedly things that people have written in to a columnist or columnists at the Daily Mail about their sex lives. And the guy says, oh, I had a perfectly nice marriage, but then I found myself madly attracted to Rita because we were in a bar someplace, or to June or Jane or Florence. One of these characters, Meta, Florence, the French version of Florence. And she looked really great, and we did stuff that was not necessarily stuff that I did with my wonderful, loving, adoring wife while she's back there with those wonderful, loving, adoring children, whom we both cherish and worship madly because they're ours. So the guy's out there for the night, or for maybe a couple of nights if he's really radical, doing stuff with Rita or Florence. For one night or maybe more nights doing stuff. One of these babes he's picked up, or has picked him up, who knows, that happens too. But he still loves his wife, and sometimes he even goes back to his wife rejuvenated, revitalized, reinvigorated by this experience he's had with, I won't list the names again, they're getting kind of boring. And his marriage is just fine. If anything, it's strengthened by this great experience. And then, on the other hand, there's the woman, but in this particular article, she's not doing that stuff with these guys. What she's doing is she's going through one of these websites. Apparently they exist for women who are looking for male escorts. And she finds a guy named Hugh, something like that, some sort of monosyllabic name. And she is also reinvigorated, and she goes home and she finds that she's become more expressive and open in the bedroom with her loving husband than she had been before. This was today's story in the Daily Mail. Well, your host goes back to his microphone and his numerous insights, and among those insights is the following. Sex is like food. It's something humans get hungry for. Some people's hunger is satisfied by having macaroni and cheese every night. Others want sashimi from time to time, or veal parmigiana. Beyond that, it's not always easy to get your partner to expand his or her sexual repertoire, so to speak. How do you do it? We've talked about this before, but watching porn? Or what do you do? How do you... You can go to one of the wonderful Tantra classes that my associate, Anita DiFrancesco, occasionally offers, or many other people. Laurie Handlers has wonderful retreats. I don't know how specific they get, but they do wish to assist the individual in widening their sensual perspectives, as in fact does this podcast. Let's then turn from there to something else that immediately comes to mind since we're talking about gender. Ladies and gentlemen, we are talking about gender. And in so speaking, it strikes us that being male/masculine may be more of a challenge than it once was. Men want to feel and be appreciated and desired sexually. But in the post-Me Too era, that isn't happening nearly as much. Also, I believe that testosterone levels are going down in men and maybe up in women. A trans woman, you've heard about things, you've heard about trans. A trans woman has it both ways, so to speak. In this case, she can be desired sexually by other men and also put that man in a submissive position by enticing him to allow her to penetrate him. That is, he still has his male member in this type of trans procedure. There is a whole subculture growing up out there which is not gay in the traditional sense because men are attracted to and believe that they are having sex with women who have all the sexual characteristics of beautiful women. And of course, real women from this subculture, in the sense that they were born as women, are entirely excluded. However, again, this is what happens in the post-Me Too era, which is also a look but don't touch era, in which men are afraid of women, of being trapped by women in some way, whether in marriage or legally. Men see all the politicians and celebrities accused of rape, some falsely. I won't give examples of that. You can reach your own opinion. So they get the idea, if they want to have sex, they'd better go to a sex worker. And going to a beautiful trans worker may serve another purpose: humiliation. We saw an attractive trans sex worker in the sense of a man who had been sculpted into the shape of a woman, only retaining his bulge, as they call it in such posts, with the suggestion that she would have anal sex with him, and the caption, "Real men like pain." In another there was the caption, "I don't argue in relationships. I just put it in his mouth." Here's a line from a website featuring nude trans women with their male members fully exposed. Quote, "Who could possibly know more what a man wants in the bedroom than a girl who was born a man and still has a dick? These gorgeous creatures know how to make you reach realms of pleasure you can scarcely imagine, and their tight little bodies are very different to what you're used to." Welcome to the second decade of the 21st century. Enjoy, my friends and listeners. Enjoy it while you can. On our previous episode devoted to sexual fantasies, we observed, on the basis of very deep and profound research by college professors, that many people have fantasies of sex with their same gender, their own gender, while they are in fact having sex with the opposite gender. In the event I have not confused you sufficiently, this means that women very, very frequently have fantasies of having sex with other women, either known to them or not, very frequently known to them, while they are having sex with their male partners, their lovers or husbands, whatever. And such fantasies assist women in having orgasms, because the man alone is not doing things which would lead to the woman having an orgasm, or the man is not sexual in a way that causes the woman to have an orgasm. This is, in fact, how it works nowadays, or it's probably always worked this way. Nothing has changed, you know. It's all the same. Always has been. Always will be. God, I hope not. On the other hand, there is a significant percentage of men who have fantasies of having sex with other men, while they are in fact having sex with their wives or girlfriends. Research proves this. It demonstrates this. And in some interviews, men go into a little bit of detail of the types of sex that they might be having with another man. Instead of performing cunnilingus with their wife or girlfriend, they are in fact performing fellatio with another man, either known to them or more generally unknown to them, or generic. This is what happens. So, in this context of what we'll call reality, a word which we seldom employ and which for the most part we avoid, reality's a drag, in case you haven't found out. This whole notion of trans and this whole notion of men being attracted to quote-unquote trans women, individuals who are female in all respects, or at least appear to be female in all respects except they have a penis. Well, this is the sort of thing that you would imagine to happen in a world in which men, in fact, have fantasies about having sex with other men while they are having sex with their wives and girlfriends. It's all a big fantasy, you know. It's all a big hologram. We don't exist. We are projected somewhere. We are projected onto our own minds by one of those rich moguls who develops this sort of thing. It's not real, you know. None of this is real. The only thing that is real is me, Mr. Sensuality, speaking into your ear, speaking into your heart. And now it comes time for that part of the program which I know everyone looks forward to every week. This part of the program is entitled Mr. Sensuality Predicts. Mr. Sensuality predicts that in the not-too-distant future, sex work will become a regular part of living for adults. And adults will be given a wide variety of sexual experiences for which they may pay, either in kind or by currency, what they call the currency of the realm, or they used to call it that. And they will not be confined at all to what two people can imagine possible when they close the door behind them in the bedroom. One's inventiveness has a certain limit. Imagine watching one of those interminable Netflix series that go on for decades, for centuries. In the future, the longest-running Netflix series will in fact run 10 centuries. And we're not talking about 10 centuries in the past. People will still be watching the series in the year 3025 or whatever that year would be. Imagine that. So if it's the same series, what happens in a series? One of the things that happens is that new characters are introduced on a fairly regular basis. Yeah, they are the regulars, and they get older, and they do this, that, and the other thing. Occasionally they peel off entirely, but for the most part the core characters remain, but other characters are introduced. And, they have what are called affairs, etc., but there are new people that interest you as you go along, new situations, new places, new formulas, new formats. And life would be like that in terms of sex. People's imaginations will be spurred on, will be stimulated as never before. No matter how many sex classes you go to or sex manuals you read, etc., what you're going to do in private with your one lifetime partner in the bedroom is never going to be as expansive as you might imagine. No matter how many psychedelics you may take, the psychedelics themselves are not going to create in your heads newly inspired sexual things that you can do. They might. I'm not a fan of those things, although I certainly have an ex of mine who's an authority. It's good to have an authority on things like that. This is going to be the future, in the opinion of, and in the projection of, this podcast to which you are all devoted. Explore Redundant Epistemology, the most ontologically superfluous podcast on the internet. Our research into trans women and how they attempt to appeal to so-called straight cis men who heretofore have only experienced sexual intercourse or activity with cis women, the appeals are often based on the alleged assertion that it is more pleasurable for a man to have anal sense in the sense of penetrating a trans woman than it is penetrating a cis woman's vagina. So it is interesting to do a bit of research on this, not with respect to any survey of men who have made that comparison, although I imagine in the vast literature on everything you could possibly imagine, this is indeed a research which has been performed. So let us take a moment to look at a number of factors. First, let's look at the average erect girth of a male penis. The girth, the circumference, if you measure it around, the average is 4.59 inches for a erect male penis. So that's a piece of information you might put in your pipe and smoke it. This research was conducted by Dr. David Veal at King's College London, who conducted a meta-analysis of the English language literature on penis size. They screened 16,678 publications and, based on various criteria, whittled the list down to 17 studies. This is this type of research on which we base this podcast. So everything you hear on this podcast is true. And what other podcast can assert that? Now we move on to vagina size, which is in fact the parallel element of this research. The most commonly used measurements regarding the size of vaginas come from good old Masters and Johnson from the 1950s. They looked at 100 women who have never been pregnant and found that vagina lengths unstimulated ranged from 2.75 inches to about 3¼ inches. When a woman is aroused, it increased to 4.25 inches up to 4.75 inches. Women, for a variety of reasons, probably the vast majority not because they wish to convince their male partners to have sex with them rather than with trans women. So in any event, many women wish to make their vaginas tighter for purposes of increasing sexual pleasure for themselves and sexual pleasure for their male partners. One wishes also to bring up the notion of women being able to contract their vaginas during sexual intercourse. This apparently happens in some cases, and many of you men out there have probably experienced this, as of women. Let us look at the most common method of achieving this, which are in fact the so-called, and indeed properly referred to as, Kegel exercises. According to Harvard University, I applied there and was accepted, but just couldn't afford to go there. Oh, shucks. At any rate, Kegel exercises, Kegel, were developed in the late 1940s by Dr. Arnold H. Kegel, an American gynecologist, and Kegel exercises themselves are simple. However, finding the right muscles to exercise is not. 1/3 or more of women and men who do Kegels are actually working their abdominal, buttock, or inner thigh muscles. They don't, therefore, reap the benefits of the Kegel exercises. So, for women, pretend you are trying to avoid passing gas. Pretend to tighten your vagina around a tampon. Then, practice contractions. Choose your position. Start by lying on your back until you get the feel of contracting the pelvic floor muscles. When you have the hang of it, practice while sitting and standing. Contract and relax. Contract your pelvic floor muscles for 3 to 5 seconds. Relax for 3 to 5 seconds. Repeat the contract-relax cycle 10 times. Keep other muscles relaxed. Don't contract your abdominal, leg, or buttock muscles or lift your pelvis. Place a hand gently on your belly to detect unwanted abdominal actions. Extend the time. Gradually increase the length of contractions and relaxations. Work your way up to 10-second contractions and relaxations. Aim high. Try to do at least 30 to 40 Kegel exercises every day. Spreading them throughout the day is better than doing them all at once. Since these are stretch exercises that no one notices but you, try to sneak in a few while waiting at a stoplight, riding an elevator, or standing in a grocery line. Goodness heavens, there are a number of places and ways you can practice these Kegel exercises if you're a woman. Diversify. Place short 2 to 3 second contractions and releases, sometimes called quick flicks, as well as longer ones. Ladies, those quick flicks are going to get you where you want to go. Kegel exercises in an emergency. If you leak urine when you cough, sneeze, laugh, bend over, or lift something heavy, stress incontinence, so-called, doing 1 or more Kegels before a trigger may be enough to prevent any leakage. If you have the urge to urinate and doubt you are going to make it to the toilet, doing Kegels may get you safely to a restroom. Thus we have Kegels. Now we're going to go to certain devices which are intended to, and which in fact do, have the effect of helping women learn how to contract their vaginas. Benoit balls, also known as orgasm balls, rinotama, Venus balls, or bienling, are marble-shaped balls, usually hollow and containing a small weight that may be inserted into a female's vagina and held in place by the pubococcygenes muscles. They may be used as a sex toy by creating sexual stimulation or pleasure by rolling around in the vagina, stimulating movement and or vibration. They create a subtle stimulation that do not bring the users to immediate orgasm, but rather to tease. Okay, women? I've known a couple of women who in fact use these Benoit balls, orgasm balls, although they're not really intended to bring you to full orgasm. They're intended to bring you to the brink. The brink. Fun place to be. We should talk about that more, and we're in fact talking about it now. It's at the brink of orgasm that a lot of pleasure occurs. Teetering on the brink, tottering on the brink. It's like the experience of standing on a cliff and you're looking down and you have this feeling of excitement, but you also have the feeling of a little bit of danger. You're standing there and you're standing there. Wouldn't it be great to have this experience on and on and on, and not just this momentary experience which also contains fear, but it's a fear that you enjoy. The enjoyment of the fear of slipping over the edge. They may also be used for a medical purpose, such as to increase the strength of the pelvic floor muscles, much as Taoist sexual practices have been used for centuries, and the Kegel exercises are used today, as we've just discussed. Similar to Kegel exercises, Benoit balls and other shaped vaginal weightlifting equipment are recommended by gynecologists and obstetricians to increase vaginal elasticity and bladder control. It is possible to leave the balls in the vagina all day and use them while sitting in a rocking chair. Health experts caution against prolonged placement of foreign objects in the vagina due to the risk of infection, which of course is something of a concern. Now, here we turn to some comments by WebMD, in this case by Carmelita Swinner, MD, editorial contributor. She reminds us that Benoit balls in recent years have been shown in the film series 50 Shades of Grey, but they've been around since about 500 CE, what used to be called AD. Dr. Swinner goes on to inform us that strong pelvic floor muscles may make sex better for both women and their partners. During heterosexual intercourse, she reminds us, a woman's ability to contract around her partner can intensify his sensations, increasing blood flow to the area and making it easier to contract the muscles may also make sex more enjoyable for a woman. However, it should be noted that the evidence for this benefit is mostly anecdotal. So we're waiting to provide, which we shall, a major grant of $16 million to Harvard University or any other institution which would like to, in fact, do statistical research on how many men and women find this increase their pleasure. So Dr. Swinner goes on to say that you can use Benoit balls to strengthen the pelvic floor in one of two ways. Insert them, holding them in place for several minutes as you move about naturally. Then you can also perform Kegel exercises around them. Benoit balls may be used on their own or with other sex aids, such as a vibrator. Most people do not move them repeatedly in and out of the vagina as you might use a dildo. Instead, they find that the balls can heighten awareness, arousal, and sensation when left inside or moved gently. Benoit balls can be used safely by most people with vaginas. However, Benoit balls should never be used in the anus where they can fall too far into the colon. Anal beads, on the other hand, are a sex toy with multiple small balls attached together in a row. Both men and women can insert and remove anal beads from their rectum for pleasure. Pleasure. That's what we're all after here. A consistent theme of this podcast, the Explore Redundant Epistemology podcast, brought to you here by myself, Mr. Epistemology. Why fucking not? Again, based on our admittedly limited research conducted exclusively on Facebook Reels and on Instagram, we have learned some of the terminology, as I mentioned a moment ago, that trans women use to attempt to attract the interest and arguably in some cases the patronage of cis males who have heretofore only enjoyed or engaged in, if not enjoyed, sexual activities with cis women. For example, a common word is magic wand. An example again being how men react to me on the second date when they discover that I have a magic wand. Then there is the use of the word sword, also for the male organ, used in a similar way. If you sleep with a trans girl, you can have a sword fight in the morning. Which brings to mind that a long time ago we did an episode, a segment, on flirting. I recommend highly that everyone who is listening to this episode go back and listen to that one. It strikes us that, from a certain perspective, flirting has almost become a lost art. Flirting has become dangerous in this post-Me Too era. Flirting has been, in some cases, defined as an unwanted sexual approach by a man to a woman. In the entertainment industry in which I toil 23 hours per day, flirting, which used to be sort of okay, is now verboten, now something that one could and should not do. I happen to know and have done pleasant and profitable, highly profitable business with Harvey Weinstein. And in the course of that, I was not aware of his proclivities or activities at that time, even though they were going on. But certainly Harvey Weinstein is an extreme example of this sort of behavior. Nowadays, in our present moment, online flirting has taken the place of the type of flirting in real life in which humans engaged, particularly men with women. Women do flirt, but sometimes rather rarely, and when they do, as a guy, I can tell you it's really delightful when a woman flirts with me. I love it. That having been said, the amount of flirting that is done on Facebook, Instagram, these two sites, and I know that there are indeed others in which I do not participate. This is the replacement for good old-fashioned flirting, if you can call it that. Flirting also allows one to engage in fantasy flirting with individuals of other sexual proclivities, as often takes place, as we have noticed in our extremely brief research on Facebook and Instagram, into trans. One does notice quite a few cis males flirting with trans women. And occasionally, although I do not know it or I'm not aware of it, they flirt back. This is a parallel world that exists today. Trans women flirt as a way of suggesting to men that they might offer pleasures which are not available to them via their girlfriends. Curious world, the world in which, as Paul McCartney once said, the world in which we live in. Furthermore, as we have discussed previously or elsewhere in this podcast episode, flirting, online flirting, has become an industry. As recently investigated by Reuters in their series of exposés about the popular website onlyfans.com. You never know with whom you're flirting in these websites. It could be a person of the gender which you do not prefer. However, now I have discovered that AI flirting has become a huge industry. You may be flirting with an AI cloud individual. You may be flirting with a ChatGPT type individual who has been programmed to arouse you sexually just to the right point, who has been programmed to tease you and to keep you going and to keep you on that website. In the case of OnlyFans type of things, to encourage you, to incite you to tip the individual on the other end of the line, which of course is an enterprise designed to earn money. That's what it is. So old-fashioned pornography, where you simply look at an image and fantasize, is going to become a thing of the past. Why fantasize when you can engage in an activity which is designed to stimulate you with someone else, another individual on the other end of the line, who is in fact not an individual at all? As we have discussed elsewhere, personality, personhood is becoming obsolete. It's really not necessary. Yours is not necessary. It is a burden which you carry around with you. You don't need it anymore. A woman friend of mine, obviously a woman, said that her way of dealing with a man when he tries to overpower her or be obnoxious to her or get in her way or prevent her doing something that she wants to do of her own will and volition, her line is to call him an insecure man with a little dick. And that genuinely does allow us to focus on male insecurity based on that in a broader sense of the term, but also literally on that. On the phallus, as Jacques Lacan, our sponsor, likes to say. The male ego is in fact more fragile and more specifically based on the physical in a certain way than the female ego. The ways that men disrespect women on a daily basis, whether it's in a work environment or social environment or anywhere, are truly outrageous in a certain way. They're dismissive. They hear a woman say something and they don't even respond to it, don't even take it in, and go back to what they were saying to begin with. It's like an interruption. The woman is an interruption in the male ego field. It's a blip of nothingness for them in the male ego field. So a woman comes along and meets the guy, and they begin a sexual relationship, or even just a, what do you want to call it, a friendship relationship. And the woman sort of knows that this guy is a guy who does that sort of thing, who's generally dismissive of women, disrespectful of women, puts them down. This is how he behaves. And she says, well, you know, we're in love. He treats me nicely. He buys me presents. He kisses me. He caresses me tenderly, wherever he feels like caressing me. So he's not going to ever treat me like that. No way. He's going to be nice and tender all the time. Because after all, I'm his girlfriend. I'm his wife. He's not going to treat me like that. Well, listen to me, sister. He sure is going to treat you like that. Because that was how he was brought up, or because that's how his friends and colleagues and schoolmates and guys on the high school football team act toward women. That's how his boss at work acts toward his assistant or secretary. That's what he observes. That's the pattern. And he thinks that this is a way to maintain the patriarchy, although he may not know those terms and certainly doesn't. This is the deal. This is the deal. How do men unlearn that type of behavior? Because life consists of two things, learning and unlearning. Some of our, if you want to call them basic instincts, love that movie by the way, but some of our things that we do need to be unlearned. Patterns of behavior need to be unlearned. Certain self-destructive behaviors need to be unlearned. Certain behaviors that are destructive to others need to be unlearned because ultimately they're dysfunctional. They don't achieve anything. They don't bring things forward. They're not constructive. Life is about being constructive, being helpful to yourself and being helpful to others, which frequently are the same thing. The more helpful and kind and considerate toward others you are, the more helpful and kind and considerate you're going to be of yourself. It's a mode of action. It's a mode of behavior. It's a pattern, but a good pattern, to act in this way, to feel in this way. Sometimes action brings feelings. If you act negatively toward other people, if you act oppressively and disrespectfully and demeaningfully, if that's a word, toward other people, then you are going to have the same sort of feelings. Those feelings are going to dominate your behavior, or going to dominate your way of interacting with your fellow human beings, and heck, who knows, even with your dog or your cat. It's a negativity. It's a lack of responsiveness. It's a dismissive aura that you have about yourself. And it's not going to make you happy at the end of the day. Who's going to have the psychological problems? The person that you're putting down or you? Who's going to develop extreme anxiety? Who's going to develop addictions? Who's going to need some sort of therapy in order to get over these negative feelings that are dominating your mind? The person that you're putting down? No, it's you. You're the one that you're harming by those sorts of behaviors. Hey guys out there, you're the one that you're harming by putting your wife or girlfriend down. You are the victim of your own oppressiveness. We have the R word, which is relationships. We have the D word, which is dating. We have the O word, which is orgasms. And now we're going to introduce another word, the C word, which is, of course, for cheating. In an article published in Evolutionary Psychology, Rebecca J. Brand, Charlotte M. Markey, Anna Mills, and Sarah D. Hodges reported on a study of hundreds of individuals to determine if differences in gender, whether a person is male or female, is a good predictor of whether an individual is likely to cheat. Using a broad definition of cheating, women reported being as unfaithful or more unfaithful than men. Men were more suspicious about cheating and more likely to discover the cheating than women. Women were more likely to break up with their partners, to begin new relationships after cheating, and to report reasons for cheating that may include a desire to switch long-term mates, such as being unhappy in the current relationship. This study goes against the popular notion, as reflected in most films and television shows, that men are the cheaters and women are those more likely to be cheated on. In a recent episode entitled The Helper Syndrome, and I think in another episode too, we discussed this acquaintance of mine whose name is Charles, and his soulmate, his true flame, the love of his life, Leslie. So I want to say a few more things about Charles, because I think Charles has authorized me to discuss him in this podcast, which is nice of him. He's a very gracious and generous guy. The deal with Charles, as far as Leslie was concerned, was that he would get into a relationship with her in the sense of really apparently committed and all that sort of stuff for while they were living together in her place, actually, because he wasn't making enough money to pay for two places, and she needed other things in her house that she needed possession-wise. At any rate, they were in these relationships, and very frequently she would just show up out of the blue and say, "Sorry, I met this guy, and I'd like you to move out. The relationship is over." And he would go, "Oh, whoa." He didn't have any place to live or any, no kind of support system. This was embarrassing for him. What's he supposed to do? Call around, call me, and say, "Leslie broke up with me again. Can I crash at your place?" But that didn't happen as far as I was concerned. I have no idea what Charles did. But then, next time Leslie ran out of money or emotional support, because she was working on various projects in her life, and she didn't have that amount of emotional support from her friends or family, even people she knew, so she would call Charles again and say, "Oh, hi, Charles. You know what?" Or she would meet with him and say, "Hi, Charles, you know what? Let's get back together and really do it this time." Well, off and on for a while. It really got to be ridiculous. Once Charles was sitting at a computer terminal at his job, and a message came for him from the receptionist that his keys were on top of the tire in the parking lot below the building. What did this mean? It actually meant that Leslie had been using Charles' car for quite some time, because her car, as usual, was in the impound lot or some similar places. Getting a car out of the impound lot is really an experience that Charles was not too happy or proud about. The message, therefore, was that Leslie was breaking up with Charles one more time and giving him his car back so that he would, in fact, be able to drive it away, and he would know where his keys were, because Leslie did not want an impersonal encounter with Charles to tell him that she was breaking up with him. Boop. Eventually, one day, Leslie called Charles up and said, "Let's go have lunch in some ridiculous place." I think it was a place called Glendale, which exists near Los Angeles. Glendale. And they meet at this weird pizza restaurant in Glendale that she's chosen. I don't know how. So they're sitting there, and she says, "Well, I think at long last it's time that we got married." And Charles is sitting there saying, "Oh, wonderful. This is the love of my life. She says she's going to marry me finally." But he cannot help verbalizing, what about that guy who worked at the hardware place or whatever that you suddenly ran into, and all of a sudden he was living with you and all that kind of stuff. And Leslie said, "He was my house pet." Charles is sitting there saying, "Okie dokie, house pet. Like a cockatoo or a snake or a bunny, house pet." And the deal with Charles, well, he did not tell me this specifically, was that he was not satisfactory to Leslie sexually in the sack, an expression you don't hear that much anymore except in old movies. That's the idea that I got. She was always looking for that really young, sexy, well-hung, not in the sense of having been executed with a good quality rope, well-hung young fellow. So they're engaged. They're engaged. Oh boy, they're going to get married. And spending time together, he goes over to her place and they lie down in bed, and I don't think anything really monumental happened when they were in bed. It's the same old story. So one night she invites him out to some kind of, I think it was a Japanese restaurant, and in the course of the Japanese restaurant meal, she says, well, I'm going off with someone else for a while. And Charles says, well, are you going to be sleeping with this person? He didn't say it in that tone of voice, but in his mind it was that. And she said, well, yeah, we're going to be lying with each other, doing that kind of stuff. And Charles just stood up and left the restaurant. I know it was a rude thing to do. He knew it was a rude thing to do. Left the restaurant, and then she follows him, and she had a couple of little gifts to give him. It was kind of like breakup gifts. Final breakup gifts. And I think she ultimately married the guy that she'd gone off with. I'm not really sure about that chain of events. But this happens all the time. Charles had another similar situation. He bought a house because another woman, whose name was Charlene, wanted him to and put him under pressure to. So he bought the house under the misimpression that Charlene was going to be living with him. But then one day Charlene shows up and says, well, I'm going off to France. And Charles says, well, I don't know about that. Can I come with you? She said, no. The idea is that I want to meet a French husband. That's been my dream all along. Didn't you know that? And there's Charles with his house sitting there. There's one or two other Charles stories like that. Now, are these situations of the woman cheating? Well, yeah, she cheats, but it's also a sort of, must be another word for it. There's a certain lack of commitment. You hear stories all the time of women waiting for men to commit. Women waiting for it. I knew a couple at one point, or a woman I'd actually been very attracted to and spent a lot of time with, and she'd sort of flirted with me quite a bit. So we're driving to San Francisco for something, and she tells me a story about how she and this guy were living together, and she knew that he bought the engagement ring because he'd stuffed it way high on a shelf where he thought she wouldn't see it, but she had. However, he was not proposing to her. And even the time when the subject came up a little bit, he was very wishy-washy about it. And so she was like in this anxiety position. Is this guy going to commit? You hear this a lot. Women waiting for the man to commit. The number of Americans who actually cheat on their partners is rather substantial. Over the past 2 decades, the rate of infidelity has been fairly consistent at around 21% of married men and between 10 to 15% of married women. We have long known that men have a genetic evolutionary impulse to cheat, because that increases the odds of having more of their offspring in the world. But now there is intriguing new research showing that some women, too, are biologically inclined to wander, although not for clear evolutionary benefits. Women who carry certain variants of the vasopressin receptor gene are more likely to engage in extra-pair bonding, the scientific euphemism for sexual infidelity. I want to make one remark on that University of Chicago NORC survey. They were talking only of married men and married women and not individuals in relationships, cohabiting or not. Brendan P. Zeech A psychologist at the University of Queensland, Australia, has tried to determine whether some people are just more inclined toward infidelity. In a study of nearly 7,400 Finnish twins and their siblings who had all been in a relationship for at least 1 year, Dr. Zeich looked at the link between promiscuity and specific variants of vasopressin and oxytocin receptor genes. Vasopressin is a hormone that has powerful effects on social behaviors like trust, empathy, and sexual bonding in humans and also in other animals. He found that 9.8% of men and 6.4% of women reported they had 2 or more sexual partners in the previous year. His study, published in Evolution and Human Behavior, found a significant association between 5 different variants of the vasopressin gene and infidelity, that is to say, cheating, in women. 40% of the variation in promiscuous behavior in women could be attributed to genes. That is surprising since, as Dr. Zeich points out, there are so many other factors that are necessary for what he referred to as promiscuous encounters, like circumstance and the availability of a willing and able partner. Experiments in which oxytocin and vasopressin are directly administered to humans show that these hormones have effects that go beyond sex. They appear to increase trust and social bonding. In one study of men, giving vasopressin enhanced the subject's memory for both happy and angry faces compared with a placebo, which implies that vasopressin could boost social affiliation and aggressive behavior since it increased social and emotional learning. In this context, I highly recommend our episode specifically on the topic of memory. The evolutionary benefit of promiscuity for men is pretty straightforward. The more sexual partners you have, the greater your potential reproductive success. But women's reproductive capacity is more limited by biology. So what's in it for women? There may be no clear evolutionary advantage to female infidelity, but sex has never just been about procreation. Cheating can be intensely pleasurable because, among other things, it involves novelty and a degree of sensation-seeking, behaviors that activate the brain's reward circuit. In a 2010 study of 181 young, healthy adults, Justin R. Garcia, then at Binghamton University, found that subjects who carried a variant of one dopamine receptor subtype, the D4 receptor, were 50% more likely to report sexual infidelity. This D4 genetic variant has reduced binding for dopamine, which implies that these individuals walk around at baseline feeling less stimulated and therefore hungrier for novelty than those lacking this genetic variant. Does this mean that everyone should insist on getting their potential relationship partners blood tested prior to even going out on a date? I think so. I am thinking of starting a business to do exactly that. Why not know in advance rather than finding out later? This investigation into the hot topic of cheating did evoke the word pleasure at a certain point. Now, cheating, infidelity, still carries a very great stigma in our society. And of course, it's very painful, pain, in terms of what it can do to relationships with people who have children and all kinds of relationships. Cheating is, of course, the source of a lot of sorrow. But as I said a moment ago, we're going to start another alphabet entry here. It's the P word, pleasure. Pleasure. People cheat because, as we just said a moment ago, they want new experiences, and that involves often pleasure. Now, having said that, we've spoken in another part of this podcast about the notion of men being sexual predators. As we mentioned a moment ago, male infidelity, male promiscuity, if you want to call it that, involves men wanting to have their genes spread about so that any individual, every male has their little kitties running around with their genes. But when asked whether the sexual predators of our time, look at Harvey Weinstein. Was Harvey Weinstein interested in having all kinds of little Harveys running around all over the place? No, Harvey was a guy I did business with. Didn't know about his stuff, but I did business with him. Once I took the red eye to New York to let him have a advanced view of a film that I was producing and making out here in Los Angeles. And because I flew the red eye to New York, I lost the opportunity to spend the evening flirting with Gina Gershon at the wrap party. But there's Harvey, and he looks at the movie. He didn't want to buy it, but he did give me a magnum of champagne and the use of his limo for a day. And what I should have done is told the driver, what's a nice place that Harvey would like to hang out? But I didn't. But I didn't. Let's go back to pleasure. What is sexual pleasure? What does sexual pleasure consist of? Ask yourself about the last time you really had sexual pleasure. Now, I'm not just talking about an evening where you're in some kind of a relationship, which is, by the way, an interesting hot topic we discuss elsewhere. Do people who are in relationships spend the night together, or do they just have sex and one or the other goes back to their place? Do couples who are dating spend the night together? What is the relationship definition that includes spending the night together? I have known of famous couples that are in the relationship counseling business who did not spend the night together until a very advanced time in their relationship. However, this is another topic for another time. The question we're asking here is a situation where you're in some kind of relationship, you're dating, and you have sex, and maybe she has an orgasm. He ejaculates, typical for a male in a situation like that. And it's fine. It's okay. It's relaxing. Sex can be relaxing. It's a nice, pleasant way to spend the evening. It's kind of like a nice glass of wine at the end of the evening, or smoking one of those funny cigarettes, or taking one of those little edibles like people do at the end of the evening, or cuddling up and watching an 8-hour series on Netflix, preferably one made in Turkey, until it's dawn and you realize, oh my goodness, we spent the whole night cuddling watching Netflix. An American addiction. But these do not strike me as situations where you're really thinking about wonderful sexual pleasure. The interesting point is memorable sexual pleasure can happen at the end of an evening like that, or in the middle of the afternoon, or in the first thing in the morning. So I want you to ask yourself, when was the last time you had notable, something to write home about, not home about, maybe not, something to write in your diary, something that is going to really stick with you, and is going to be something that you use as a point of comparison over the course of your life. This was a 10. This was a 12 in terms of a sexual experience, a 12 plus. So what made it that way? What are the elements, what are the components that made it that way? Seriously, what are they? And are these notable sexual experiences that really are the things that you rate the 12 plus and that you put in your diary and that you're going to remember with your dying breath? Well, people remember odd things at that moment. Are these going to be typically experiences you had with a regular partner? Or are they going to be new experiences with a new partner? Are they going to be situations where you, as a man, for example, succeeded in seducing? That's a big topic we haven't talked about. Apparently there's this guy named Robert Greene who's an authority on seduction, writes books and gives classes like all these guys who are life coaches and all that sort of thing. Seduction. What are the circumstances? What is the scenario that comes to mind when you're thinking about a truly memorable sexual experience? But I'm not just talking about sexual experience. I'm talking about pleasure. Let's take everything else out of the equation and talk about sexual pleasure. That's what a lot of people are after. Some people are not, which strikes us as a little bit weird, but it's the case. Some people are basically not. There are the predator guys who are not really into sexual pleasure. There are women who are very much attuned to the notion of getting into a good relationship with a good provider and a good steady guy who's going to be faithful and nice and help raise the kids and all that sort of stuff. And that woman may not be looking for sexual pleasure until she stumbles upon it at some point, and then it becomes a big deal. Think about it. That's your assignment for the week. Write it down, as we often say here in this podcast. Was it in a place that you typically have sexual experiences? Was it in some place new? Was it in some place that included stimuli other than the sexual stimuli? Did it involve sounds? Was it someplace exotic? Was it someplace that had a component of fear? We were watching a movie last night, and there was a line of dialogue that said, "Great pleasure is often accompanied by great fear," which struck us as really, really interesting. This makes one immediately think of cheating, because in cheating, there's an element of fear. I might be found out. My partner might find me out. The person I'm having sex with, their partner might find out. And that's a whole different kind of situation. It's a really bizarre situation. Trust me, I've been there. I know people who've been there. The partner finds out. The husband finds out that I've had a dalliance, that I have sex with his wife. Doesn't have to be a married kind of situation. Man, oh man, is that difficult, particularly if the husband or partner is someone I know socially or is even a friend. That sort of thing happens all the time. So I've given you a lot to think about when it comes to sexual pleasure, but believe me, there will be more.